It seems that every so often, some new calendar comes out that everyone proclaims, oh, this is how you got to do it. And it ends up dividing up congregations. And you have one group of people who are going to keep the feasts on these dates, and another group of people who are going to keep the feasts on that day. So this is creating division within the body. And typically, I'm not someone who goes out and tries to debunk other people's teachings. I think that it's great that we have a multitude of voices and have differing opinions. However, there are certain matters that are divisive within the body and cause our worship of God to be divided up. And that's not what he desires. So, what I did is I sat down with my friend and mentor, Rico Cortez of Wisdom in Torah Ministries, and we just had a discussion about all the controversial stuff that is popping up recently, as well as what does the scripture actually say, and asking the question, how are people to discern between all of these various ideas that pop up out there, and how can we create a little bit of unity within the body so that we can all worship our King together. So we're going to jump right into the interview. I really hope and pray that you enjoy this teaching that we did. And if you did, please share this with someone else who might be blessed by it as well. I think that there's a lot of things out there that people really they latch onto without really fully grasping the culture and the context and what the arguments were behind this. The Zadok calendar, which really is kind of more of a modern label for it. It was really the Essene calendar, the calendar that Qumran had tried to adhere to. It's something that was really one of their ways of just trying to revolt against the priesthood is where I see it.
Well, I think I agree with that. Um, where do you think the confusion lies? Because I mean, as I'm holding in my hand, I have the Mishnah Torah. It's all about the Rosh Chodesh, all about the new moon, about the calendar. That's whole thing is all about setting up what the new moon is about. And do you think the problem is that there is, I'm going to say it, there is a root of anti-Judaism, anti-Semitism within the body that they don't want to follow anything that Israel does because, you know, as we know, it's not about whether you're right or wrong because it's a Sadok calendar. People do not understand, what do you call it? Apocalyptic literature. You've done some work on that. What did you
Yeah.
find what did you find when you were doing? I mean, I found some cool stuff, but I'm interested in what you say.
So I mean there's a couple things to say about that. You've got, I mean, first off, you got apocalyptic literature, but then you also have what's called pseudepigrapha.
Correct.
So I'd probably start there in a discussion. Pseudepigrapha literally means false name. It wasn't a form of lying, but it was just a style of writing where someone who potentially had the same name as some biblical character, but more likely they were just taking on this person's persona. They wrote as if they were that person, um, and that was just a way of kind of pulling back in, and it was really just based on their thoughts and their understanding. And then when you tie that in with what's called apocalyptic literature, that was also this idea of you write as if you were in the past and you're receiving prophecy, but what you're really trying to do is you're really trying to speak about current events. So, when we look at, for example, the book of Enoch, the book of Enoch, there's not a single reputable scholar in the world who believes that it was actually written by the Enoch, the pre-flood Enoch. There's no evidence of that. You read the entire Hebrew Bible, not once is it mentioned that they were carrying around this book of Enoch, that they were handing down this information. And then just the writing style of the book of Enoch is clearly from the Persian period.
Right.
It's heavily influenced by the way that the Persians wrote. It's not at all, doesn't at all sound anything like what we see in the eras before that.
That's interesting because, when you study this stuff, we get to see it. That's why I could quote from it. I could say, hey, the book of Enoch. And I think that the important thing is the time frame. That time frame, you know, right before Messiah's, birth. You get what I learned from it, Ryan. It gave me an idea more or less of what they were thinking, their mindset. And, but even like the book of Yasha, the book of Jubilees, the same thing. I used to quote those books as if they were legit until I began to go into the scholarly world. I'm thinking, wait a minute, I could use it as a reference. I mean, but I cannot establish a whole theology and lead people to follow something from something that is not in scripture. So we end up back when we were back in the system of religion in which they disregarded half of the Bible and adding things to the New Testament and adding things to the Bible. Aren't we doing the same thing now? I mean, adding a calendar that is not supported biblically at all, but by an extra book that is not even canonized. It makes no sense. I mean, where are we going?
Yeah, and I mean, and that's the key. The reality is that throughout the Bible, God promotes community. It's, I mean, the people, it's not the person of God. It's not, you as a lone wolf. It is the community of God. And so just the acknowledgement by a community, by the worldwide community, that these are the books that we find inspiring, is so important. And that doesn't mean that you can't draw value from Enoch or Jubilees,
Correct.
but you have to put it within the context. It's not about this is divine revelation, but this, Jubilees helps us to understand the mindset of some of the groups of Judaism around the first century and a little bit before the first century. Jubilees, for example, that was written as a way of Hellenizing the Torah, which what that
Correct.
means is in the Greek world, you didn't write about your heroes and talk about all the times that they messed up. And I mean, that's one of the evidences to me that the Bible is valid, that it's true, is because who in the world would ever write about, their heroes, Moses, who's messing up all the time, right?
Right.
But in the Hellenistic world, that was very shameful. And so someone went and rewrote the Torah in a way that, kind of minimized all the places where the people messed up in order to present it to the Greeks as like, oh, this is an honorable tradition.
Right. I think understanding culture too really helps. Although honor and shame has always been prevalent through the Bible and the Torah and the prophets, but it was really hyper emphasized in the time of the Hellenistic period. And, Israel has been so influenced. And that's the one thing by the way, people don't realize that's where the Sadducees came from. They came from the during the Hasmonean period, the Sadducees from the Antagonist of Zoho. It was a rabbi, man. He was doing a study. He says, do not serve, I'm going to paraphrase, do not serve God, was expecting something in return. And then the guys who actually, became Sadducees from Zadok. By the way, that doesn't mean that all the priests were like that. It means that the sons of Zadok is crazy. And I mean, some priests were actually Pharisees because that was how they identified their observance. And I didn't know that for a long time either. So it's like, it's nice to highlight that. And
Yeah,
basically,
and let's stop there just for a second. It's important to point out the Sadducees, that is from the word Sadok.
right, that's true.
And so yes, some of the Zadokite priests did go out and start the Essene, or the Essene community, the Qumran community, but that wasn't all of the Zadokites. There were still Zadokite priests who were part of the temple cult.
Well, you cannot be a high priest unless you're from Zadok. So obviously, you have to, even like, for example, I keep hearing this nonsense all the time. And I call it nonsense because it's no the way I study the temple. That's been my focus for over 20 years. And I got Joe, and he's been doing it for 40 years. And it's not like we pretend to know everything, but I like to think that after 70 years between two people, we have an idea more or less of how things work. And when I keep hearing that, Ananias and Caiaphas, they were not really Sadducites. Really? They were corrupt. They were lousy people, but they had to be from the line of Aaron. And they were actually Sadokim. They were sons of Zadok. but they were corrupt. There's two different things. It's like Biden,
Yeah.
right? He's the most corrupt president in the whole United States, but the office is still the office of the president. People respect
Yeah.
the office. They don't respect him. So that's the same thing. For some reason, the notion that they're corrupt, so therefore they cannot be priests, that's not how it functioned. The priestly office was given to them with a greater responsibility than anybody else. If they didn't do the job, they carry the guilt. They carry the guilt of the whole priesthood and the tabernacle. Heavy duty stuff, man.
And to carry that even further, even if you don't agree with the results of the US election, even if you don't think that Biden got enough votes, it doesn't matter because he was sworn in. And if you rebel against his laws that
Treason.
he enacts, you're going to jail. It doesn't matter.
So that really led into where I want to go to. Legally, according to Torah, and according to Judaism, the way that was established. Again, uh, just a side note. We're not trying to defend here whether it's religion or Christianity. We're trying to just talk about the subject, okay? I mean, I follow the Hillel calendar, but the Hillel calendar has been followed because it actually follows all the way back from temple times, and they didn't have all the mechanism now. The temple service, the altar, the priesthood, Sanhedrin, the sighting of the moon, all those things were needed in order to make it official, but they were always counting. This is one thing, Ryan, people don't get. They will always count. The cycles of the moon are consistent. Cannot go more than 29 days, 30 days, you have to start a new one. I mean, I don't understand what's so difficult. Okay.
Yeah.
But what they did, and by the way, check this out. How many months do we have? 12 months, right? How many weeks? 52?
Yeah.
Isn't that 13 months? You got 4 weeks in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Do
mean,
the
because
math.
you have the 3 days and then, yeah. And a lot of people, the solar year, which
Uh-huh.
the Essenes thought was 364 days, is
Correct.
actually 365.25, which is why we have a leap year.
Right.
So if you're
Exactly.
following this, like this Essene calendar, within a couple hundred years, you're going to be, or maybe even less, whatever the math works out to be, you're going to be celebrating Passover in the middle of winter or in the fall.
Which is exactly why God says it has to be in Aviv, spring. Nisan means spring too. It's just from a different language. If you go Nisantu from Babylonian or Mesopotamian, I mean, it's like people sometimes, and we were there, by the way. I mean, we went through that process, and I understand we need to help educate people and share the information. But you also have to know the resources you're using. Somebody's website that's not a scholarly website when it comes to matters of law is not going to help your case. It's like somebody the other day trying to tell me the word olam doesn't really mean olam, and then they're quoting me the Strongs, and I'm going like, really? I mean, I'm just saying, we know that in certain cases the word olam can mean a set time, but there's also a lot of cases when the word olam means for eternity. So which one is it? You can't use one resource or a website from somebody in the corner and say they're completely right. I mean, so that now that you brought up about the president was sworn in and legally, although it was illegally obtained, but the moment he's sworn in, he's sworn in. Okay, so the question is, who biblically were in charge of establishing the feast days to declaring them? That's the one thing people don't want to get. And if we say Judaism is doing certain things right, people get all bent out of shape. They don't understand law. We got to look at it from a law perspective, not religious per se, in my opinion. I don't know if you feel the same way, but we need to ask who were determined to do that work. Is it us? Is it some guy in the corner? Is it a messianic leader? Or is it me or you to start a new calendar? That we need to answer that question.
Yeah, I mean, you look at, I mean, the duty of the priest was, it wasn't to have everything figured out, but they were to make that distinction between holy and profane, right? They
Correct.
were to create that separation. And so when we look at that, while I think there's a very clear distinction. I think this is where sometimes people get a little bit caught up because it's like, well, does that mean that we have to follow everything that Judaism says? And that's not what I would propose at all. But when it comes to the things that are related to that which is holy, which is the determination, for us today really falls down to the determination of the feast dates. Um, that there's a very clear precedence in the Bible for that. And beyond that, I mean, you look at the logic. Why did they create the Hillel calendar? Was it
Right.
they did they think that it would always line up perfectly? No. But when you're in diaspora, when you're spread out across the whole world without internet, without Facebook, how in the world would you know when the barley is Aviv in
Right.
Israel? It was a way to create unity within the body.
Yeah, based on already the calculation of the counting of the moons. It's interesting that some of these people argue about the calendars, right? So kind of funny. And then when they no, because Passover is this day and the Hillel calendar is one day before or after. It's like, that's really good for people who just count, back 2,000
Calculated it.
years, you
Yeah.
know, when no NASA, no sighting on the moon or whatever. And they're like, that's pretty good math, man. I mean, it's amazing how they did that stuff. Let me read a verse. Can I read a few verses?
Yeah, absolutely.
I like to support what you said. In Ezekiel 44, verse 23 and 24, when I study this, it scared me because I'm thinking, wow, man, if people understood the ramifications of breaking law, something that's lawful, says, and by the way, verse 15 says, for the Levitical priests, the descendants of Zadok, who care for the responsibility of my sanctuary. When the Israelite went astray from me, they will approach me and serve me, and they will stand before me and offer the fat and the blood, declares the Lord Adonai. They shall come to my sanctuary and that approach my table and serve me, and they will observe my requirements. And somebody will say, oh, you see, the Sadok calendar, they could do it. But they have a restriction on where they can do it. Can they do it from the Qumran community all the way in the desert?
Mhm.
No, it has to come from Jerusalem, according to Torah. And it says in verse 23, and they shall teach my people the difference between what is holy and what is unholy, and the difference between the clean and the unclean. I must show them. And at a legal dispute, they themselves shall stand to judge, employing my judgments, and they shall judge it. And with respect to my laws and my hukah, statutes, all my festivals they shall keep, and my Sabbath they shall consecrate. This is a very important verse. My question is, where do they do this from? Can it be from Oklahoma? Can it be from Michigan? Can it be from Florida? No, it has to be from Jerusalem. That's the law. It's from Jerusalem. I don't know, man. So
Well, and I mean, you see that in the New Testament as well. I mean, you see when there was a dispute among the followers of Yeshua, where did they go? They went
they
to
went to
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Yeah.
They had their own council, but they still were in Jerusalem. And then when we're specifically talking about the priests and who had the authority, I mean, I look at the New Testament and I see Yeshua nor Paul ever went and said, actually, you're not the high priest, right? They never challenged the office
Ever.
of the high priesthood. They never said, well, it's like when Yeshua was on trial, it wasn't like, well, you don't have authority over me. Why don't you bring the Qumran high priest in and he
Right.
can make a judgment? When Paul finds out that the person that he speaks out against is a high priest, he isn't like, well, you're not legitimate.
Right.
No.
That's a great point. Do you know Yeshua never once before or after resurrection, before or after the resurrection, he ever crashed the temple and saying, okay, guys, I resurrected. Let's go in. I'm the order of Melchizedek. Let's do it. And let's get rid of these guys. They're corrupt. And let's just listen to the guys in Qumran. Paul, almost 20 some odd years when he got arrested and he was taken to Caesarea, right? And he got to meet the high priest. Remember that somebody slapped him because he talked to him in a manner he was not supposed to? And immediately Paul says, no, you're not a high priest from the Qumran, so I don't respect you. Did he say that? No, he immediately apologized. He did not know because he was so removed from Israel so long that he didn't know that was the high priest that year. I mean, that only goes to show you how out of order we are by adopting different calendars from just anybody who thinks they have it figured out, and they don't have the legal authority to do so. And it's dangerous because it's creating confusion. And we don't have the, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think we have the authority to establish any new calendars. And it has to
Yeah.
go through the proper procedure.
And even for anyone who can't quite get there with the authority standpoint, you called it out right there. It's causing create confusion. It's causing chaos, and you don't see God promoting confusion and chaos. One of the things that in my, especially in my studies on the book of Romans, where Paul talks about obeying governing authorities, and you're sitting there thinking like, okay, he's talking to Romans who were, that those are corrupt people, but in the scripture consistently, tyranny is better than anarchy. Now, tyranny is a bad thing, and God works to overthrow tyranny and set up a proper government, but he never does it by promoting anarchy. There's always has to be someone in charge. Even if that person is corrupt, it's better than rule by the people where just whatever we want goes. And I mean, for me, even if I couldn't get to, and I do agree with obviously I agree with the authority issue, but if I personally couldn't get to the authority part on the calendar, to me it would be what's creating more anarchy in the world. Everyone following this one day, this one calendar that we know from time to time is a little bit off, 1 or 2 days, or everyone doing their own thing, and you've got people sitting at home not knowing what to do because their congregation is doing things this way and this other congregation is doing things this way, and I mean there's just chaos.
No one's talked to each other either, and they don't even invite you because, it's really crazy. You know what's interesting about the Aviv, right? Let's talk about the Aviv. The barley being Aviv means that it's ready for the spring. That's what it means, okay? And when you read in the Mishnah Torah, you read some of the Jewish sources that people don't want to read because it's Jewish, and those are the sources. And I remember when you started with me a long time ago, you know, we always have resistance in certain resources because we're trying to
Mm-hmm.
figure it out. And then you realize there's some things you need to read at least to know what is going on and to understand better. And when you study the temple, you start going into the laws of the Omer and how they have to, roast it and prepare it and things like that. And they, the people don't realize that there was a radius around the temple. And I think it was maybe I think it was like 12, 13, or 20 kilometers. I'm not sure. It just can't come to mind right now. It was from Migdal Eder, from Jerusalem to Migdal Eder, the area where Yeshua was born. A surrounding area, whole radius of that, everything belonged to the temple proper. So they had a place around the temple where they used to do the barley, raising the barley, because the priests were in charge of making sure that it was Aviv, because they're the ones who declare the calendar. Now you see people today trying to find the barley Aviv, but even if it is, in order for the new grain to be acceptable, you have to present it in the temple.
Yeah.
I mean, hello. I mean, Leviticus 23, verse 7 and verse 19 tells you that. It's trying to let you know, even the barley has to, when you have the barley that is ready, you're not really even supposed to touch it until after you present it and you wave it in the temple, and it has to go through the proper procedure. But as a matter of fact, you cannot even have new grain until the Omer is presented in the temple. It's
Mm.
called the first fruits.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, what are we doing? There's no look. God is beautiful in the way He organized everything. If you go to Numbers, and I highly encourage your audience, that look into Numbers chapter 28. You're going to notice that every high holiday is connected with an offering. The moment that the high holiday is connected with the mizbeach, the altar, and the offering, is out of the realm of the common. You cannot determine those things anymore because God ordained them for the holy. And if you touch on it, you're committing transgression against God's holy things. I will not follow anybody who's doing the Zadok calendar. I will not do that. That's just, as a temple researcher, I will not do that. No Jewish guy follows the Zadok calendar. They know more Hebrew than any of us. I don't think the Karaites follow the Zadok calendar that I know
No,
of.
no, this is yeah. I mean I know that there were the Essenes back in the early first century, but to my understanding, I haven't found anyone who was doing this,
Yeah, but they're like
in
a
the
small
past
group,
2000 years or 1800 years.
right?
Yeah, and it was a small group. Yeah.
Right.
And there's always going to be those people out there that want to do things their own way. And I mean, you see that throughout the Bible, that there's always these groups that want to do things their own way. But when you look at, I mean, and to me, this is the biggest thing with the Essene community. Yeshua never visits them.
Never.
And nowhere in the New Testament do we see him visiting them,
There's a
which is
reason
which
why,
is
maybe.
huge.
Maybe we have to
Um,
ask. He never
and
mentioned
and
them.
and they were wiped out by the Romans.
Yeah.
They completely missed the Messiah because they're out there in isolation. And sure, perhaps, I mean, that they were it's like today. The people who get out there and what is it, Alex Jones or whatever, the people that
Uh-huh.
shout conspiracy theories, they have big followings and they're heard, but that doesn't make them right. It just means that people who shout the loudest with the oftentimes the craziest ideas often do make a big splash and people hear about them. So did John the Baptist, did he have some connection with them? Probably. Everyone probably had heard a little bit of this because
Right.
it was kind of like a bit entertainment, like, let's go out and hear what these these people are saying.
But that's a good point you bring, because not once we know about we can get an idea who the people were in the first century. For example, we know about the Zealots. We know about the Sadducees. We know about the Pharisees. We know about the Herodians. We know about minimum four groups of the sects of Judaism, or the groups in in the first century, better yet. But we never hear anything, not by anybody, by Peter, by Yeshua, by not one argument. I mean, Yeshua had an encounter with the Pharisees, mainly them. I don't think he really had much to do with the Sadducees. I don't remember him having an argument with the Caiaphas.
The Well, that and the resurrection,
Oh, that's
right?
right, the
When
resurrection.
they come
Um,
and they
uh,
present that
and it's
ridiculous scenario.
interesting that it was resurrection, something they did not believe in. So,
Hmm.
and then after that, it's like, okay, no need to talk to you no more because you don't believe in that. So let's move on. But how come there's not one exchange with the Essenes? And how come
Yeah,
Yeshua never mentions the Sadok calendar?
and they were. I mean, it's not, you couldn't just say, oh, well, they were there but they weren't listed. I mean, the New Testament authors are very clear in
Yeah,
listing out these different groups.
yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, what have we looked? I mean, I forgot to look into Josephus, what he says about any of the calendars. I forgot to look
Yeah, so
into it.
I did actually, I did a search on Logos about it, and actually Josephus doesn't mention anything that I could find about a solar calendar. It really comes down to the Dead Sea Scrolls is where
Right.
most of this is recorded at.
Our friend Joel Halevi sent me an article by, really good one, by Jonathan Van Dove. That's another thing. Do me a favor. If you guys are going to listen to something someone Messianic guys are doing, look for the proper scholarship on these things. We have to at least, you know, we we have to do diligence, that if we're going to follow something, that it doesn't follow someone's logic. It has to follow criterias of, law, and, because these are holy things. That's one of the things that I've learned when I started with Joe, what kedusha, what holiness was. When I understood what holiness really was, everything changes. Some things you don't touch. And you mentioned that earlier. So there's some few articles, and I talked to a friend of mine who's has almost a doctorate, I think now, a master's in, biblical theology, and out of Haifa University, knows Aramaic and some Akkadian and Hebrew, him too. And I
Yeah.
asked him about this I talked to him about this before, and he was a little bit more typical Jewish guy, more forward. He's not just only religious, but this guy is a scholar, you know. And he says, don't listen to him. Only the educated will fall for that. And that was like, oh, snap. Big words, because he understands the information. Now that he's trying to demean people. And unfortunately, is bringing chaos because we have certain attitudes towards information coming from Israel because of our biases. And I think it's so you have to separate one from the other. I mean, if a Christian says something that is correct according to the Bible, I don't have a problem that he's a Christian because he said what is correct according to the Bible. If a Jewish guy says the same thing according to Scripture, I have no problem with him. But why do we have to pick and choose when it's convenient? That's a problem. We have to consider the well-being of the people, because this movement, I think, is going to a place in which there will be a point of no return because there's so much chaos. Who wants to be part of it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I've seen. And I mean, you've done this a lot longer than I have, but man, it's just, it seems, especially in the last 3 years, there's so much just grabbing at whatever out there that's just, it's not the core of Scripture. It's not about making God king, you know?
COVID, ah, that's it. Making God king, yeah. Making the creator of the universe, the father, the king of the universe. I don't know, man. It's just, COVID did something to people. Seriously. I've noticed that. Even my wife noticed. She said, man, what's going on? It seems like everyone has gone backwards. And in the Spanish, I'm very heavily involved right now in the Spanish world. It's blowing up. And it's interesting. It's like 1999 to 2006 repeating all over again for me.
Mm.
All the same arguments and all the same things. And it's really interesting because when they were starting out, they were looking for you because you have some information they haven't heard. But then after they hear
Yeah.
some crazies in the corner, they begin to act the way we were back in 2000, 2001, 2, 3, and 4. Going through the same thing. Is it Yeshua or Yahshua? Is it Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, or all the crazy names? Or is it this calendar, that calendar? And it's like, why don't you just learn how to follow the Torah first? Get acquainted with the information. Because when you're doing this after 15, 20 years, some things will happen. You'll take your route, go left field, never come back. Or you saying, I'm gonna fight through some of the things that I do not understand. Or either you convert to Judaism because you're not really looking into Scripture to balance it out. You want an identity of a religion instead of a relationship with God. It's a big difference,
Yeah.
Okay. So I've learned to manage both, and I went through the process. So when I try to tell these people, hey, by the way, that argument, some lady was teaching about the Aleph Tav about a month ago. And I'm going, I did that teaching a long time ago, and ask me why I don't do that anymore. There's a reason, So, and they assume that you're minimizing Messiah, and it's not that. It's just that as we grow and as we study and as we search and as we look, we'll realize that we're making adjustments,
Well, and that's what I see as what triggered, what triggered the regression with COVID is because, one way or another, we all retracted into our own shells, right? We all kind of isolated in various fashions. And this whole thing that we're doing here, whatever we want to call it, religion, belief in God, whatever we want to call it, it's a community thing.
Right.
And it's about coming together. And it when you're talking about this, it's just like, yeah, I mean, if people would come together and hear things, you wouldn't go back to the Aleph Tav stuff because someone would come up and go, actually, I know Hebrew, and that whole Aleph Tav thing, here's what that means. Okay, let's move past, we've gotten past that, let's continue to grow. But
Right.
instead it's this like isolating out, and so you have to start from ground zero, when
Yeah, I know, man. Tell me about it. It's like, oh Lord. And people say, well, Rico, when you teach, you give a lot of information, and yeah, because there's a lot to learn. You're still focusing and trying to understand something that if you stop fighting it, you'll get through it. And it's like the two-house thing. I mean, with respect to the topic, as I know there's a restoration of 10 tribes. I get it. We know that the Bible talks about but you can learn in 6 months. That should not be the only topic you talk about forever. I mean, yes, it's involved in prophecy, fine. But it's like There are a whole bunch of Gentiles over there that may not be the house of Israel that they need to come in. How do we reach them? You know?
Yeah.
And I came to that realization. Do I believe in the restoration of the whole kingdom? Absolutely. The Bible is all based on that. But it's not the only topic. We talk about honor and shame, reciprocity, on client relationship. We talk about imperial call. We talk about the temple. We talked about this. We talk about that. And let me tell you something. The reason why there's so much confusion about this stuff, and I've been saying it all along, and I get a lot of backlash from this. And I'll say it again. If you study the temple, you'll understand the Bible better. Let me give you an example. Okay, so when you read in chapter 1 of this particular resource, yes, it's a Jewish resource. It's called the Chilkot Kiddush HaChodesh. It's about the new moon, right? Listen to what they tell you. Listen to what they say in the introduction. It's about the Rambam. He says, over the centuries, the latter two portions have received the less attention other than the section of the Mishnah Torah. In other words, the half shekel and the new moon. They don't really receive a lot of attention, even in Israel, because they follow what has been established. They understand
Sure.
law, okay? But it's really interesting what they say. It says, and many yeshiva students may never have been exposed to them. Accordingly, the translation of these portions was more difficult, for there was far less source material to rely on. In our hope, however, that the presentation of the material in this form will create the basis of the discussion of the study, right? But you know what they say? They say, both of this mitzvah, which is a commandment, the donation of the half shekel, and the sanctification of the new moon, are connected to the Messiah with a future redemption. For it is in that era that the communal sacrifices will be renewed. And it is then that we will return to the sanctification of the new moon on the basis of a sighting in Jerusalem. I mean, they know it. They know that this is not the permanent one. They know that's the one they needed to do for what you said earlier, to create the unity. Can you imagine in the Jewish world if they didn't have a ruling following the calendar when they're counting the days without all the other elements, and they still maybe one day off? I mean, can you imagine the Jewish people argued about everything? You know the chaos it would have created?
Well,
And no one argues.
there probably wouldn't be a Jewish people.
It's true. It's true. And it's interesting. That is a good point. Yeah. Do they argue about this stuff? Do you see any Jewish guy going on the internet every year having arguments about when is the Omer presentation and when do you start counting for Pentecost? Or when do you celebrate? Not one. That only goes to show you where we're at.
Yeah.
I mean, they've been doing this a lot longer than we have. And they seem to get a grasp. And one guy in Israel told me, oh, we don't argue about it because it's law. We can't change it. Okay, thank you. Just like we love to change the president, we can't because he's sworn. And we can't seem to get him arrested either. It's the same thing. So watch this. In chapter 1, it says, the month of the year are lunar months, as is implied in Numbers 28:14. How many of you even bother go Numbers 28 to connect this thing? It says the burnt offering of the month when it is renewed. In Exodus 12:2 talks about this month shall be for you the first of months for the agricultural cycle. Concerning this verse, our sages commented, the Holy One, blessed be he, showed Moses in a vision, prophecy, image of the new, and told him, when you see the moon like this, sanctify it. So they sanctified it, right? So they're trying to let you know that it's actually Numbers chapter 28 that instructs you that when you sight the moon and then the council declares it, they have to do an offering. You can't change it. You cannot do it any other way. Without the offering, you can see it, but it's not official unless you have that offering. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And actually, how I would tie that in is a lot of people don't understand what the offerings were, right? They often, we've been taught that the offering was just about the death of the animal, for example.
Yeah.
And I turned, and it's like, it's so clear there. You go to Leviticus 10,
Yeah.
right? Moses gets upset with Aaron because they did not eat the flesh of the sin offering. And what does that teach you? That teaches you it was not about the death of the animal. It wasn't about any individual part. It was about the entire ritual. And if you don't complete any part of the ritual, it's not a sacrifice.
It's not
And
legal.
so it's not, yeah. And so
Yeah.
I mean, I would put that right in the same what you're talking about. You cannot declare according to the way that the new moon is declared set legally in the Bible, you can't declare a new moon without the full process.
I wish people, they have arguments about the new moon, and that new moon belongs to the sphere of holiness in the temple, the Passover temple, first fruits temple, the Omer temple, unleavened breads temple, because they have to bring sacrifices every day for 7
Mhm.
days. Shavuot. Every major argument we have is based on holy things. The name of God, holy. The priesthood. Now we have the Melchizedek thing. It's coming around. It's coming around. We talked about this. You wrote a paper
Yeah,
on this. A very good paper, by the way.
thanks.
And it's like I can tell people, you can argue all you want. You can try to make up your own priesthood if you want to. Let me remind you, it was Jeroboam who did that. Jeroboam changed the feast. Jeroboam changed the temple location from Jerusalem to Tel Dan and Bethel. Jeroboam changed the priesthood. They started their own. Is that what we're doing? Doing the same thing. And I find that interesting. Are the same people that call themselves Ephraimites. So, I mean, I'm not trying to be judgmental, but there's a problem here. I mean, don't take this as I'm trying to judge you, but I was there, and I needed to come out of that understanding the way I was going at it, because I'm thinking I'm in transgression of the same thing that I'm trying to keep. I'm in transgression of the law.
Yeah,
So,
and that's so important to call out. I mean, you and I have both been there, and we've learned from our mistakes,
yes.
and and so I mean, how does the kingdom ever progress if we can't, as a body, learn from other people's mistakes and not keep repeating the same mistakes?
Look, Ryan, that's a really good point. I mean, I've always taught my children there's two ways of learning in life. You can learn from your own mistakes or somebody else's. I don't know why that does that. That was weird. I can't figure out how that happens. I didn't do
I'll tell you,
anything. I don't know how that happened.
I'll tell you how to turn that off. I found
Please,
that out
because I have no
afterwards.
idea. Sometimes I go like this and it shows up. That's kind of weird. So I tell my son, my sons, you can you can learn from my mistakes or your own mistakes. Choose to learn from my mistakes. Saves you headaches. My
Yeah.
concern, Brian, my concern is this. Um, I've been doing this a long time now, and I know others have done it longer than me. But just because I've been doing this a long time, and just because it sounds logical, doesn't mean I'm right. There's not a peer review type environment amongst us. There isn't, you know, and there's not accountability whatsoever. Anyone basically is doing whatever is according to their own imagination. And the sad thing is that very few of us study the temple service, and we understand some of the mechanism of the things dealing with the temple, and every part of the feast days deals with the temple. And yet when we say something, people always reject it, but yet they argue about the same topic that we study. And it's like, wait a minute, you can't have it both ways. It's like telling a doctor you need brain surgery, and he's a brain surgeon, and then you're just going to argue with him because you don't like the way he's going to perform the surgery you've never done that he has practiced 1,000 times. You see, logical. Where do we go from here? Because this whole Zadok and Melchizedek thing that is happening right now is going to bring the demise of this movement. We've lost credibility in Israel. I don't call myself Hebrew roots in Israel or Messianic. I'm a follower of Yeshua who follows the way. That's it. Am I embarrassed because of Hebrew roots? Embarrassed? No, because I believe in the context of the Bible. Am I embarrassed about the direction that I've been part of trying to lead for the last 20 years? And it seems like you hit yourself against the wall and people fight it and they don't want to follow. Disappointed, more disappointed, not embarrassed, disappointed. Borderline embarrassment, because or a rabbi wants to talk to you about it, and he says, "Oh, what do you do?" And you tell them, "Oh, you guys are crazy," and they mention exactly the same things we're talking about. Oh, you all
Yeah.
change God, and you all change the names, and you all do this stuff. What do you say? It's true. They're doing it, and we're part of that group trying to represent. And by default, we're getting all hammered because 90% of the people who are doing it, they don't go to Israel. I took one of them with me, and I didn't realize how anti-Semitic he was. I took one of them with me. And when I got there, I'm going like, oh my God, this guy's so anti-Semitic. And I was
Hmm.
blown away. And it wasn't you, by the way. You know,
That's
I
good to
was
know.
just shocked. I was shocked, that you have people teaching you and they're Jew haters, you know? And I'm going like,
Yeah.
wow, where do we get so self-righteous?
Yeah.
It's a problem, man. I mean, it's sad. It's
Yeah,
sad.
it's interesting you'd mentioned that about, the witness. I have a friend who at the, this was years ago, but he was following some other calendar. I don't it wasn't the Sadok one or whatever, but it had Passover and unleavened bread a week or a month or something before the Hillel calendar, and so the following month he's at a conference in another state, and he happens to meet a Jewish guy, and he's sharing about how he keeps the feast, and he believes in Jesus, but he keeps the feast and he does all these things, and the guy's just kind of like looking at him weird, and then he walks off, and he realized afterwards he's sitting there eating a sandwich with leavened bread, and it's
Yeah, man. It's like,
Passover on the low calendar, and it's like,
that's crazy, right? So what? So I mean, do we even think about the example we're supposed to convey? I mean, do you realize that right now Christianity is actually establishing a great case against the people that follow Torah, and they're winning because their audience is bigger, And it's interesting um, that as I hear all these things, I'm trying to manage it. I'm trying to. It's been difficult because, as you know, we spend a lot of time trying to understand and read, and it's difficult because in some things we do have a handle on certain positions, meaning that we have resources that we can validate our point. But how do you
yeah,
deal with presenting the information without sounding arrogant, by being confident and telling somebody you don't know what you're talking about? You just quoting crazy sources, and the newsletter that I read recently about the Zadok calendar. I study ancient Near East. Don't be quoting the Enuma Elish when you don't know what in the world you're quoting. When you quoted the Enuma Elish, you don't know what you just quoted. There were so many things, and I'm going like, what is he doing? We study this stuff. We actually went back and studied. I can show you like all the books that I have on the topic. And when they quote it, people that are supposed to be reputable and they're supposed to know better. And then they don't give you any resource where they got their stuff. And when you see the resources, you're going like, really? That's where they got it from? How about Kitchen? How about MacArthur? How about Moshe Wainfield? How about Fenham? How about Meredith Klein? How about all those guys who really know the topic? How about Casuto, if you're Orthodox, you know, you know what I'm saying? It's like we have to do due diligence when we are about to change the world of a movement by integrating a new calendar without the proper authority, with a proper without the proper law procedure, and then the stuff that you quote doesn't line up with what scholarship is supposed to be, and the people following this. I mean, what does that say about our movement? What does that say about where we're headed? And by the way, can
yeah,
we question? By the way, can we have a conversation with these people and say, hey, can we dialogue? Can we compare information? Can we have a peer review? Can we like sit down and say, what gave you the right to change that? Or how can we have a conversation? I mean, would you agree with that? Why can't we have a conversation?
yeah. No, I mean, I agree.
I mean, your teaching on the book of Isaiah 53 is probably the best teaching I've ever heard. But in the beginning, it was hard for me to accept it, remember?
Hmm.
And I needed to learn to listen and to have a peer review and to say, I need to pay attention to this. And I sat back and I actually paid attention. And I'm going like, oh, snap. What he's saying is right. And then I have to come to you and say, you know what, you're right, man. I'm sorry. And that was a great lesson for me. I'm thinking, okay, I don't lose anything by hearing. Doesn't mean you're going to change my mind, but at least I'm hearing you, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's, and it's so vital. And that's, I mean, that was probably the biggest thing I learned in my time in college, in the master's program. And you probably are learning the same thing, as you went through your master's program, is you have to be willing to listen to other people and respect them, even if you don't agree with everything that they
Right,
say. You said it earlier. If someone who's a Sunday keeping Christian says something about the Bible that's true, great. If someone
right.
who's an Orthodox Jew who you don't agree with everything, if they say something that's true, it doesn't matter that you don't agree with everything that they say, but you have to be able to come to the table and listen.
Man, I remember about 15 years ago, I was going through my own self-righteous kick. I thought I arrived and I thought I knew some stuff. And somebody made a comment and says, hey, man, what? And man, I apologize for saying this stuff. And I repented, by the way. And he says, what Christian scholars do you read? And I cannot believe I made this statement. I'm telling saying, so what can a Christian teach me? Boy, was I humble. Now, again, understand, I'm not talking about the Sunday keeping Christian who doesn't follow Torah, doesn't follow. I'm talking about the scholarly world. It's a huge world of difference.
Yeah,
Did you agree
between
with it?
yeah, I mean a pastor at a pulpit
Yeah,
doesn't that they don't have time to study these things.
right,
They're just kind of towing the party line.
right. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the scholarly, like John Walton. John
Hmm.
Walton, man, he can come off some stuff with ancient Near East and he's on point. But if you know how he follows the Bible, it's like almost replacement theology, crazy stuff. But I don't care about his lifestyle. I just care about the research. The research is on point. Meredith Klein, some of the best articles in regards to the book of Deuteronomy. And then he was still a Methodist. And I have a book right here that it was written by a Catholic priest about covenant and the covenant
Hmm.
declaration formulas. Oh my Lord, ancient Near East. And I mean, everything is on point with facts. And I don't know how in the world he can still be a Catholic, but so we need to learn to differentiate between one and the other. And that was hard for me in the beginning because I only listened to people who believe in Yeshua the way I did. That's the way I did it. You know what I mean? But then
Yeah.
when I'm reading some of the books of people who believe in Yeshua the way I did, they were writing some crazy stuff. I'm going like, that makes no sense. So because I knew how to read, you see. So when I
Yeah.
start reading these guys and they start lining up with the, Pritchard, Ancient Near Eastern Text, and some of this other stuff, I'm going like, oh, I don't really care. And then when I went to my master's program and I was asked to teach a doctor class, okay, the president of the college told me, he said, listen, we just need you to teach the facts on the concrete research. We don't care about your belief system on this stuff. And then I understood how they're able to separate one or the other. I said, oh, I get it. To me, I study this stuff so I can live it closely according to the Torah. To them, they present the information, but it's only here. It doesn't get here. I don't want to be like those guys. I want to live it, but I want to present what they present in the proper context. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
I
was a
mean, it's
huge shift for me, and understand. So now I'm becoming a little bit more tolerant with people that don't agree with me on certain topics. But then I required, show me your bibliography. Let me see your research. Show it to me so I know what you're saying. Don't tell me that you had a separate revelation from God that no one else got. Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can yeah, you can string Bible verses together all day long to come up with all sorts of stuff, but if you can't show the evidence of how those verses should be understood and why they should actually, it's okay to link them together,
Right.
you
It,
gotta, yeah.
let me ask you a question. So, what will be your opinion in regards to anyone who is teaching and following the Sadducees count? Now, forget from we're talking about from someone as educated as you studied, and we have been studying and looking into the stuff strictly from scholarship.
I mean, I would encourage them to actually, you know, get in and look at the actual first century sources, the actual sources. What I see a lot of times is people are reading someone else's blog article, and that blog article might quote something or claim to quote something, but they don't actually, you've got to actually follow the chain. You've got to go
Yeah.
back and look at it. You've got to verify it, because a lot of times what they're quoting isn't what that person was saying. It's like in
Yeah.
when people quote, they completely misquote scripture. I forget. There was some song about, the blowing the trumpets on the walls or
Oh,
something like that.
blow the
Uh,
trumpet in Zion,
yeah,
Zion.
and it's like
Oh
about the
Lord, you don't want to
destruction
sing
of
that anymore.
Zion. you know, you 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 can quote something
Yeah.
and completely quote it completely incorrect. So you've got to actually go back and say, is the person who this is being quoted, is this actually what they're saying? And when I go, but when the couple sources I've checked, those are not quoting it saying that, that the Essenes had a correct calendar, that the book of Enoch was actually written by the biblical Enoch pre-flood. They're not trying to make that claim at all, and so to take someone's words and twist them into your own little doctrine, I mean, that's dangerous, and that's why, you and I, we've always done our best to say, here's my resources,
Yeah.
here's where I got this from. Go out and check it. Like, don't believe me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you always say that. Don't believe me.
Go
Here's the
verify what
resources.
I say. Validate it.
Yeah.
And it should be that way. I've made adjustments. I've been corrected before. I mean, I'm still corrected today. I mean, the other day I did a teaching. It was about Metzora, about the lepers, right?
Hmm.
And I made the statement, and this is Spanish congregation. I made the statement that the oil, the ritual was as in the ritual that the priest had when he became the high priest, by the blood and the oil in the hand and the ear and the finger and the big thumb and the big toe. But I made the mistake to say that it was the oil that the priest used, and that's only for the priests and the kings. Well, one of my
Mm.
students who really studies, he comes to me afterwards. He goes, Rico, check out the verse. He gave me the verse, and I'm reading to it, and I go, oh my God, I made a mistake. It's not that oil. It was the oil that the leper brought after the days of
Oh.
purification for the offering. The leftover, they poured on the head, but they used that oil, not the one. So I had to go back later on,
Mm.
and I made the correction. And I told guys, I made a mistake. The teaching was right. I was talking about this, and I mixed it up with this other stuff, just like I made the mistake with the ashes of the red heifer and the lepers. I kept saying that if you touch corpse impurity, you cannot go into the city or the temple. That's not true. You can go into the city and part of the Gentiles area of the temple, but you cannot go beyond the soreg with corpse impurity. The lepers were not allowed in the city and in the temple.
Hmm.
So it's easy to get confused. But once somebody highlighted that for me, I had the duty as an educator to say, guys, I made a mistake and I need to rectify it. So what are going to happen to these leaders that are now embracing the Zadok calendar, and they're leading people astray with resources that are not validated anywhere in Scripture, anywhere in the Bible, not even in the scholarly world? Who's going to take responsibility for that? For the thousands of people keeping the feast their own day?
Yeah. And that, I
Who's
mean,
going? Go ahead.
that's a big thing. I mean, leading people to essentially break away from the community and form their own, little thing.
So how can we handle correction in a manner that is edifying? Because people don't want to be corrected anymore.
Yeah.
They really don't. That's why I kind of basically insulating myself. Teaching, sharing, whoever wants. I started a new study group. It's called The Way. Students of the Way. That's it. I don't want to be labeled with any other title. I'm just students of the way. I'm neither a Christian. I'm neither this. I'm neither that. I'm neither a Judaism. I'm just student of the way. Let's go back to the first century. Well, guess what? First century context, because we study it, it doesn't mention anything about the Sadducees calendar. Nowhere. Paul never mentioned it. Why wouldn't he? He's trying to create a congregation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's outside of Jerusalem. He could have done whatever he wanted to. And yet you see that in Acts chapter 18, he goes to Cenchrea and he does a Nazarite vow, which requires an offering. And he finishes that in Jerusalem for Pentecost. Well, which calendar was he using? The Zadok calendar?
Well, there's a great question for you, because you've studied the temple way more than I have.
Uh-huh.
If you showed up at the temple and said, 10 days before the actual Passover sacrifices and say, hey, I'm here to slaughter my Passover sacrifice, what would they do to you?
Dude, the penalty is cut off. Karetz. People don't realize the penalties for these things. I mean, they can either like lash you or they'll take you to the Sanhedrin council and they go like, wait a minute, why are you here? You want to do your Passover now? We still got the Aviv is not ready. Well, but you see, you don't understand, high priest. We are now high priest in the order of Melchizedek again. Now we can determine our own calendar. And we saw the Aviv in the side of the road where all the little, people were driving by or whatever. Which if closest to the road that it is it gets more heat. So it would Aviv faster than it would in the fields. That's why you need people who know what they're doing. And even if it's Aviv, okay, so even if it's Aviv, do you have the question is whether or not it's Aviv or not. The question is this: do you have the legal jurisdiction to determine and declare it? That's the question. I mean, This is serious in my opinion, and we don't have evidence. My question to the audience is this: where do we have a biblical precedent that this has been mentioned, argued, discussed, or anything related to this in the first century? That should be our measuring stick. Not today in the 21st century, in the middle of the United States, coming up with crazy theories. I'm not giving you the proper resources to validate your point. Okay? I know quoting sources is not a Greek thinking. Quoting sources is actually a responsible behavior of a leader trying to lead you into the next understanding of the Bible. This is important.
Yeah.
We need to be accountable. You do it all the time. You have to give the sources. So what do you think? Talk to me.
I would love it if if there was a way that people could get together, but when we all live in different places and we don't have any sort of central structure, it's it's really on everyone else, or on each individual to be willing to come together. And I mean, you and I have always said, if you want to study, we're more than open to that. There's not a lot of people who want to come together and study, though. So to me, it really comes down to the broader audience speaking up and saying, hey, if you're going to teach this stuff, like, have you considered this? Why aren't you interacting with these people over here who are presenting this argument? That's the solutions.
I think that I'll give you my opinion about that. It requires a level of saying, I'm open to correct. Look, the other day, there's one guy who is basically taking this agreement to a personal level. And I basically told him, I said, okay, if you're going to get personal, then we can debate the matter. Let's do it in private. Let's just have a debate about it. And I don't like doing debates. You know me, I don't like that.
Yeah.
But if you're going to get personal on something that is just an opinion that you have, then you give me the sources and validate it. And then I'm willing to change if you give me the information. But I'm reading the information and I'm seeing the sources. And it's like, it doesn't stand anyone, any first, any, because you read it, anyone who understands scholarship knows that this is a very weak argument for a new calendar. So where do we draw the line? Are we going to obey God or are we going to obey someone's opinion? And I'm sorry, I just can't agree with it because it doesn't have the legality to go behind it. And we need to reconsider where we're going, in my opinion. I think, and by the way, separate the position with a person. Okay,
Hmm.
we're not attacking people.
Absolutely.
We're not attacking people. We are actually doing what the Bereans did. Okay, so you wanna follow this that is going to affect the well-being of the community, then show us your information. We want to see. Isn't that what the Bereans did with Paul? They opened scripture. Oh, you say that he died and resurrected according to scripture? Show us so we can see it. You know,
Yeah.
and I think that's the responsible way of doing something.
And
And
that, I
it,
mean, and that's why I wanted to sit down with you and have this discussion. Normally if people want to believe whatever, if people want to believe the earth is flat, I'm not going to sit down and create a
right,
video to counteract that. But when there's something out there that is affecting the well-being of the community, I do believe that's where we have a responsibility to step up and provide, evidence of the destructive nature of that.
right. I agree with you. And I think that's when we have to separate one thing from the other. And, you know, I remember reading John Walton's book from the 1996. Wow, that was a waste of $30. But then I saw that from that moment, 1996, to the latest one, the last 20 years, wow. So what I took from it was,
Growth.
if I would have eliminated him for that first book, I would have never really been blessed by all the great research he's done after that, because I would have had my own bias, you know. But I
Yeah.
was learning to be mature in that I don't agree with you on this particular position, but what else do you have? And then all of a sudden now, in the other things, he rectified what he said back there.
Mm.
But at least he had the opportunity to be heard, because as educators, that's what we do. We just research, peer review. How many papers have you read based on peer review?
Yeah, I mean, tons. Yeah, that's
Where's the
I
peer
I
review? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just to say I don't want I hardly read anything that doesn't have
Right.
isn't peer reviewed.
So where's the peer review within the body now? When somebody comes up with something, where? I mean, and by the
Yeah.
way, how can you give a peer review on something you don't study? I mean, these guys are experts in their area, their fields. So it's like, nah, if you never studied the temple, you cannot give me a peer review. You need to be a student. Joe Good can
Yeah.
give me a peer review. You know, Rabbi Mackover, who's one of the authorities in the temple in the world, he's third in line. You know, he can give me a peer review about the temple because they study the stuff, and any other scholar out there that I don't know in the temple can. But what if you don't study the temple? How can you talk about a priesthood when you don't study the temple? Right?
No, it's I mean that it reminded me of back when COVID started. There was some doctor who was coming out against COVID, and I looked up their what they were a doctor of, and they were a podiatrist, like they're a foot doctor,
Jeez.
right? And it's
Crazy.
like okay, if I have a fungus on my foot, I'll go to you for your opinion, but don't don't tell me, this, that, or the other about COVID, or it's respecting people for what they're good at, but
Right.
understanding that the the more of an expert you are, the more just fine-tuned you are into that one area of expertise.
That's all it is. Doesn't mean that we are actually even perfect on that either. It's just that we are more in tune with some of the mechanism how things work. That's all it is. It's not like we're pretending to think we know more than anybody. It's just that's our area of expertise. Look, even yesterday, I'm doing a teaching and I was getting ready to. I found something in one of the Hebrew words, and I went to all the, not the Strongs. I went to the Halot, and I went to some of the other
Yeah.
academic lexicons. And then on top of that, I didn't quite understand a few things. So I went to the Hebrew teacher at the congregation that I'm going to, whose teacher is actually Joe Halevi, you know. So we have this line. So what I did was I read it. I'm going like, Then I talked to her and I said, can you help me with this? Then I sent all the information to Joel last night, and I couldn't use it. I couldn't use what I thought I have found, because when you talk to the people who understood the language, I would have been taking it completely out of context, although it would have sounded great. I would have been wrong, because if it's a Hebrew listener is listening, they go like, you don't know what you're talking about. That's not how you use that Hebrew word in that context. And the lady tried to explain it to me for 20 minutes, and I still didn't quite understand until one thing she said. I go, oh, I get it. I understand what it means. And I study all the time, and I still don't know. And when it got to the Hebrew language, I went hands off and I called the people who knew. Now I could let my
Yeah.
ego go with it. I say, oh, I got this commentary here in lexicon. It says this, so therefore I'm going to present it. Well, the lexicon was right. I did not understand the lexicon. You see?
Yeah.
So I needed to be honest. So, okay, who are my resources here? Who can I go to help me in this matter? You know something? They saved me an embarrassment. Because if I would have shown that, somebody who knows Hebrew would have called me out on that, because I would have presented it as if I knew the language. Don't you think it's the same thing if you're presenting a calendar, which is all connected with the temple, and it's all connected with the priesthood, it's all connected with the altar, it's all connected with the commandments and the decrees that God made. These are hukim. No one can change them. Passover is a statue. Cannot change it.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a heavy duty thing, man. We're not sinning against Jewish guys because they're wrong. We're actually going against what God established and who has the authority. And it's like, I think we need to reevaluate the direction we're going, and even who is listening. And just because we've been doing this a long time, we're not above correction. We need to be accountable. And I'd rather follow what the Jewish people follow right now. Legally,
Yeah.
I'll follow that. And biblically, I can see why they do it. You know, if you want to know more, go to Wisdom and Torah, or ask, or go to your page, and we can learn more about it. But don't argue about something if you're not willing to hear. I used to do that all the time, and it doesn't work. We never go forward, you know?
Yeah.
Will you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. It's just we're just circling the mountain, if you will. Just
So what do you think will
doing the
be the
same.
answer? What do you think will be the answer to deal with this stuff? Because clearly
Yeah.
this video may get some feedback for you, you know, because we're
I mean,
being
I
direct.
yeah. I mean, again, I encourage people to continue ask questions, and to, if they are in contact with people who are promoting this sort of thing, just, ask those tough questions, and ask them if they've been willing to come together and look at the evidence with a group of people who have studied this. And
Right.
I mean, and I would really push um those people really coming to you and Joe, because like you said, if you look at it in the Bible, the feasts are intimately connected to the temple and the sacrifices, and that's not, uh you just can't dispute that. I mean, it's what we're doing with keeping the feast is really just memorializing the feast, because to keep the
Right.
feast was going to the temple and stuff.
Correct.
um and so, yeah, I mean, like you said, you've got to go, and you've got to have that discussion with the experts, and you've got to be willing to learn and adapt, and say, hey, I was wrong, and here's the path forward.
I agree. Last point, because I have to head out. Appreciate you
Yeah.
letting me hang out with you a little bit. It's been a while. Well, it's been what, 3, 4 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, the whole thing about Nissan, guys. Aviv means spring. Okay. Did you know that the word Aviv is a Canaanite word? Are you going to start using it now because it's a Canaanite word? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Nissan or Nisantu is this. It's the same time frame, different language. There's no
Hmm.
secret here. There's no conspiracy. Okay. So when you go to Babylon, it's called Nisantu,
Yeah.
Nisanu, because it's spring. That's what it means. Nisan is the same thing, another variation. There's nothing wrong with the word. I
Yeah.
mean,
The Hebrew language, the early Hebrew language, picked up words from Egypt and from Canaan.
I
So,
know
yeah.
it's kind of nuts, man. It's like, we want to be so self-righteous now. We say, oh, Nisantu, it's from Babylon. Yeah, and it's like you call, okay, don't drive a Mazda or don't wear Nike. Please, don't wear Nike. That's the god of victory from the Nikos or Nike. from Greco-Roman world. And it's interesting that Paul had one of the guy called Apollos. He never changed his name. I
Yeah.
mean, we miss it, man. We miss it. And it's like, if you're going to talk about ancient Near East, please study the subject before you quote it, because anyone who actually understands ancient Near East knows that this is basically rubbish.
Yeah.
You know, and we don't want to lose credibility as a kingdom. We don't.
Yep.
That's the only reason why we're doing this. We're trying to encourage people to go back and look at this stuff and start considering requiring resources, valid resources, valid, you know, that
Yeah.
would allow us to understand this, you know.
100%. Well, thank you so much for being on here with me. Great catching up with you again.
Yeah, man.
And
It's cool.
for the audience listening, please, I highly encourage you check out wisdomandtorah.com if you haven't. I'm sure probably most people who are listening to this already have, but we've got to learn to grow as a kingdom. So
Amen.
um,
Thanks
yeah.
for having me. And the whole purpose of getting together and talk about it is not to create any problems or for people to think that we hate anybody or that we're attacking anyone personally. We're not. We're talking about the well-being of the kingdom. And we need to call out in certain instances, certain things that Yeshua never talked about, the disciples never talked about. There's no evidence in the New Testament of that. So why are we following something that is not even in scripture and books that are not there, and we're treating it as if they have the same caliber as scripture? That's my question. And I think, can they be used for study? I have them. I have them up there. I got the books that you were talking about. I read them. I've quoted from it sometimes as a source, but I'm not going to put my whole lifestyle of the Torah based on what it says there, because I know how they were written and certain things like that. Anyway,
Yeah.
thanks for having me, man, and appreciate catching up with you. And I hope that this would edify somebody and will cause others to question and ask the proper questions.
Amen.
Thanks, man.